Okay, dokes. And you'll let me know if we can't. Hi, I see that there's a whole bunch of people coming on, and I just want to see if I can mute. Nope, can't do that yet. All right, so hi everyone, welcome. We have a couple of friends with us on the back end here. I'm with my friend Stephanie Liss. It's such an honor to be with you, and I'm going to introduce you in a minute. And to those close friends who are here at the back end, just kind of like giving support and here to ask us questions. It's fabulous to have you, and everyone on Facebook. I think that I haven't been on Facebook for about 3 or 4 months. This is my first time making a mini appearance, but couldn't resist the opportunity. And today I have the great privilege of having a conversation, chatting with my friend Stephanie Liss, who is an award-winning author, playwright, has written for television and for theatre. And Stephanie, it's just an absolute privilege to have you on the call.
It is my honor to be talking. You know how much I admire you. So it's my honor to be here with you, believe me.
Thank you, thank you. You know, a lot of people don't know this about me. My degree was in fine arts. Sometimes when I'm in America, I say fine arts and they think I mean finance, and I totally don't mean finance because I'm just kind of getting the lowdown on that now. So the creative arts really draw me, and when I was looking at your bio, I found something interesting there. It says you were in New York, and then I think your folks took you to LA, is that correct?
Yes.
And then you came back to study at Tisch, but there wasn't a playwriting program at Tisch. And so you started in the acting world and said that that taught you an enormous amount about writing.
Yes.
Can you share with us what you mean by that?
Sure, I'd love to. I am a firm believer that anyone who wants to be a writer should take an acting class. When you are in an acting class, you learn how to break down a scene. You learn the things for which an actor is looking when they choose a role. You learn how to create a moment. You learn what builds a moment. You learn about character arcs, and you learn this from actors. I have more from being around actors and watching actors. And I've been so privileged to work with some of the best actors.
Yeah, so you've worked with Vanessa Redgrave. Whom else?
Sharon Lawrence just did the reading of Sister Africa for us here, and David Lyons, who was in Hotel Rwanda.
Wow.
It's such a privilege to watch them work. But more importantly, it's a privilege to learn how to listen from them. Because an actor listens, not just obviously with ears, but with the entire being. And
so would you say that there's something you're learning from acting which you don't learn from life? Because, right. You know, what you remind me of, and you'll come back to the question, but there is a principle in Hasidut, which is that there is a direct light and a reflected light. Like the light of the sun and the light of the moon, it's very often compared to masculine and feminine energy. And the sages tell us that Or Choser, the reflected light, is very often more potent than the initial light. It's almost like as you're speaking, I thought of that because there's life, which is the direct light, and then there's the acting, which is the reflected light.
Yes, yes. And when it reflects back to you, that's when the immersion begins. And that's when the connection begins. And you have to connect and tune into that light, the reflective light. And that's how you learn. That's how I learned on my feet what a good play was, what a good script was. You feel that rhythm, you feel the moments. And it's not just obviously what's on the page, but it's what's not on the page. And you learn how to create those moments. You learn how to like in prayer, when I'm reading Tehillim, there's a moment when I feel it's going to take off. There's a moment when I feel when the spark begins and then it explodes. That's the same process. That's what happens when I'm writing a play.
You know, I'm thinking of some books I've loved about writing. I loved Bird by Bird. Did you read that?
I have to be honest. I've never read a book on how to write or on playwriting. I've never taken a class.
Oh, come on.
I'm serious. I have an aversion to it.
Your master class, well, I guess I'm not a writer in that way. So it fascinates me to watch how people watch. You know, that's what reminded me.
Yes.
Learning playwriting from master actors or actresses.
Well, I see, for me, it's not something that's learned. I go by instinct. I go by intuition. My process is I hear it. I can see an entire play in my head, and I know what the play is, and I feel it. But when I sit down to write, first of all, obviously, I always pray. I always connect, and I ask to be used as the Keli, and that I can fill that space, and what is supposed to be there comes through me. And I hear it. I hear lines, I hear scenes.
But you don't have the whole thing worked out.
I see it. No, I see it sometimes. I see it, it'll flash. I know what the entire play is. But when I sit down to write it, I hear it. Close my eyes and I hear it. I hear, like, I collaborate. My music comes from Rebbe Sol, Grossberger.
Right.
He created the contemporary Jewish music movement. And often when we're working, part of our process is I read him the play and he takes it in. There's the reflective again, that listening. We have our own process, very spiritual, our own process. And often when he creates the music, it is exactly what I've heard.
Wow. That is remarkable.
That's happened 3 times, 4 times.
It's interesting to me because what you're describing is a process that is so intuitive, and actually Kabbalistically, when you look at the word for faith, it's emunah, and the word for art is omanut.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because art is very much about the superconscious. There's a beautiful passage in a book called Torah Shalom, the teaching of peace, or Shalom, Rabbi Shalom Dofer, and he addresses the fact that there are lines and circles. You know, in your body, the circle is the skull and the line is your spine, and life is really about balancing circles and lines. And some of us are very linear, and that could get to be very square, and some of us are only circles, and that could get, it's a little insane if you just keep looping around. You know, the ideal is to combine them and you have the spiral. There's a combination of the line and the circle. But I do think that the artistic process is very much about drawing down from the unconscious, from, you know, the unknowable head. And you seem to be conveying a lot of that in describing your process. And at the same time you write, good notes make better writers.
Yes.
Which kind of is like, oh, that's the line aspect. No?
No, yeah, absolutely. Good notes, like every writer, we're all faced with it. Certainly when I'm writing television, I can walk in a room and people walk in and every page of the script is dog-eared. And you're like rolling your eyes thinking, oh, Lord, they hated the whole thing. They didn't. I mean, sometimes there are small notes. But the people who give the best notes show me what I didn't see, what I can't see, perhaps what didn't come to me at the time. And if I really take that in, I start to see a pattern in my work, and I can correct it if there's something that's not working, and it makes me a better writer.
Who's taking the notes for you in that process?
Oh, I take down the notes, but the producer, the network, the director, the actors, the network executives,
And
they
this
can.
is when they're first reading the script, or there's
Yeah.
a reading?
No, well, there are notes after every stage. After reading, after they read it for the first time, because especially in TV, but in theater now too, a first draft, by the time they get a draft, it's not a first draft. We've rewritten 5-10 times, and sometimes it's called a producer's pass if it's television or film. The producer gives you notes before it ever goes to the network or the studio, so you're constantly changing it. Often my experience has been the notes that I've gotten from the hierarchy after I've made all the producer's notes and the network sees it for the first time, they go back to my first draft because that first instinct is right.
Wow.
And that has proven to me, and I love theater because you have notes in theater, you do table reads, which are my favorite because it's all the actors and the director and the producers sitting around a table and you're hearing the script for the first time. The actors will tell you what doesn't work for them. The director will give you notes.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about the Torah as a script.
Yes.
It is a script there. I have in the Haggadah Companion that I put together, there's something in there, one of the lines, I can't remember now, but about the art and the process of creation as it aligns with commentary on Torah, because the Zohar tells us that the original Torah was white fire. And then we couldn't see it. It's like looking at the sun. You can't do that. So God burned black fire onto the white fire. And those are the letters. And that's one of the reasons why a scribe, when a Torah is written, has to make sure that the letters don't touch each other. Each letter has to be fully immersed and swimming in the white fire. And then there's another layer, right, of white fire. That's the Mishnah, the oral tradition. And then there's a layer, the Gemara, which completes the Talmud. And then so it goes through the generations. And we tend to think, well, we're more sophisticated because we have so much black fire. But sometimes that black fire is just like, I'll work with people when they're drawing. And then it's like, no, I liked it more when there was more canvas. Give me more of the canvas and give me more of the space. And in my study, I feel so much of my work is about going through the layers of black fire to find the white fire that's there. And you're kind of describing that, aren't you? I mean, that original point.
Yes.
That took you on this journey.
Yes. First of all, writing to me is the most holy work to me, that I was called to it. I've been writing since I was a toddler, and it's something that is burning within me, and that's exactly the term I use. I got the fire in my belly, and I don't write because it's what I do. I write because I have to, because I see and I feel. And this is how Hashem speaks through me, creates through me. This is how I'm being used.
Your soulprint.
Yes, and it's such a holy process, Shimona. When I sit down to write and I'm really into it, I have never less of myself or more of myself than I am at that moment. I just feel I get out of the way.
Right.
And this is what I say to Bruce when Rebbe Sol, when he's playing, he's on fire. And I watch him get out of the way and let it explode within.
Wow, just remarkable. Do you know that the previous Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashad, speaks about creation, Rabbi Shalom Dober. He's the one I quoted earlier about circles and lines. And he says there's yesh mi'ayin is creation ex nihilo, right? There's a hiyuli in Hebrew, I think, like nihilism is connected, this all potential amorphous state. So there's creation ex nihilo, something from nothing. But he says the most accurate depiction of God's creation of something, of being from non-being is writing.
Oh,
isn't that remarkable? I always was struck by it because, I work with clay or I paint, but it seems to me that he's saying, I don't know, you're the writer, how you relate to that, but it's almost like there's this conceptualizing of something, and then through the hand, the consciousness comes into the world, but it's bypassing the normative process of creation.
that's exactly what it feels like. Time stops, space stops, and something is just exploding.
Wow.
When it's working. Now, when it doesn't work, and when I'm having trouble with it, it's agony. It's nothing like this. It's torturous.
Right.
And I can walk around the block for days and when I try to do it, if I try to fix something, it doesn't work. I have to step back. I have to let it go. I have to pray, meditate. I have to get my process going that is entirely internal, because otherwise it's not going to be organic.
I so get that. I mean, I understand why artists use substances, because the muse, when it's eluding, what are you going to do? And the mystics tell us, pnimius chochma bittul, pnimius bina simcha. The inner aspect of wisdom is abnegation of self. The inner aspect of understanding is joy. You can't pursue wisdom. It comes to you. People translate Chabad as wisdom, understanding, knowledge, but I find it more useful. The terms I use in my coaching program are conceptualizing, analyzing, and internalizing information. You can't conceive. You don't go after that. It's something that happens. It's almost like, okay, I'm walking around the block and I'm going mad in that loop, and then something breaks free.
I have to step away. I have to, again, I go back to Tehillim. I will read a passage of Torah. I will go back and read the Rebbe. I'll study a piece of Tanya, something that gets me into that sacred. Yes, it has to open, because if I'm not, nothing comes through. And I'm the instrument. The minute I think I'm doing it, it stops.
Well, Steph, we spoke a little bit about watching actors and good notes and this process of trying to open ourselves to the creative unconscious. But you also share on your site that you're a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I was so fascinated by the fact that you spend time on Skid Row in order to write about the experience of people there. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And then just for those of you who don't know Stephanie, we met each other at my friend Olivia's home. And Olivia, if you're here, she's here. And no, Olivia's not on, but many people who know her are here. And at that Shabbat dinner, you told me about your time doing research and going into Arafat's compound. So I'd really like people to hear about that, but maybe just before you can share this notion of authentic writing, or writing from the place of the other, or truth by going into the places, kind of these ranging portrayals that you give, but experiencing that. And it's something I've heard from, another writer friend of mine.
the research feeds me for the writing. First of all, it's a huge responsibility because, from the subjects, the only things that interest me are social issue, are Jewish, all of my plays, obviously Jewish in substance. And from a social issue, a tikkun olam perspective, because for me, writing is my tikkun olam. I can't do that unless I've walked those streets.
No.
I've heard those sounds. I've breathed that air, and I've experienced just a moment. Because that, again, that connects me, that opens me. I am no longer present. I'm the instrument, and I carry it in my keli until it's time to sit down and give it life. And so whether it was being on Skid Row, that was the first script I'd ever written for television. Never got made. And that was an example. She was it never was
not get made.
I was like a baby. I was in my 20s, barely mid 20s. And it was the first thing I'd ever written. It was the late 70s. And the producer was one of the toughest. She's since passed on, Oliver Shalom, but she was one of the toughest in television. And there were notes on every word, and I was so angry and so upset. And I was a pisher. What did I know? But I will tell you, she was the first. She taught me that project was just torturous, but she taught me how to be a writer.
Wow, I love it.
Tuned me for television because that's
I have to interject here as well. As you're speaking, I'm just synapse going off. I find people being judgmental or critical has a very bad rap, but I think it's very useful. I mean, firstly, people don't want to be angry. But anger is a very important emotion, meaning not that you have to act on it, but it is a sign that a boundary has been violated. And if you can't allow that to yourself, then you can't set boundaries. If you don't at least acknowledge the discomfort, the dissonance, then you're going to abuse or be abused or turn that anger inwards, and it will be depression. I find the same with being critical or judgmental. Isaac Asimov has that thing, I, you, he or she, where I is the positive form and you is the neutral and he or she is very critical. So you could say critical or judgmental. I have a course in the method that's called Erotic Hats. And one of the things I speak about, it's like Edward de Bono's Six Thinking Hats, but I speak about the idea that what I call red hat thinking, which is gevura, severity, you have to have it. And it sounds to me like this, was she the editor or the producer, the one who was?
She was the producer.
Can you share her name with us?
Sure, it was Marion Reese. And she did she did the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. I mean, she was brilliant and she had a reputation for being tough.
She cared enough about the product, not to care what you thought of her, correct? Or
right. And later, I respected her more almost than I'd ever respected anyone. At the time, I didn't. But in hearing what you're saying, for me, there's a difference between being critical and judgmental.
Right.
Because for me, when I hear a critique, it's not necessarily being critical. A judgment is fooey, but the critique is what I like to take in.
That's why I mentioned Asimov, just kind of referencing the fact there's so many subtleties to those words, but she did critique you in a way that wasn't always favorable.
Oh, I wasn't prepared, because it was my first, oh God, it just was never ending, but it made me a writer. and it made me a good writer. And I found myself going back to her later in my career and asking her questions or asking her to read something.
And was she available? You're saying, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we hated each other, but we respected each other.
Love that.
You know, but yeah, sure she was. She loved it. She was a fabulous mentor in that respect. And again, I need the toughness sometimes, but it depends on from where it is coming, from whom it is coming. I won't take notes from just anybody. I mean, that sounds lofty. Right. I'm sorry, but there are people I don't respect. And so I don't necessarily take in what they have to say. People I respect, I will hang on every word. Going back, and I will drive them crazy with questions.
Right.
Even at this stage, I want to know more. I want to be more. I want to deepen my work. In
Hebrew, the word for intention is kavanah, and for direction is kivun. It sounds like that to me, you know, where because you are so attuned to the inner world, you hear the intention that it's been given, and then that drives the direction that it
exactly. Thank you for saying that, because being attuned to the inner world, that's what drives my work. Even when I'm researching people, well, if we can segue to Arafat, when I went up to that compound.
Well, can you go back? Do you mind? And be attuned there and just tell people how that all came about. It's such a fascinating story. I was about to ask you.
I was in the middle of writing a movie, again, that never got made. I went through a period of, you know, development Gehenna where nothing got made. It was like 12 movies. But I was in the middle of writing a script for CBS.
Right.
And my cousin, who was in the IDF intelligence, called me in the middle of the night. He said, our time, and he said, I have to tell you a story. He told me something that had happened to him, of which I had not been aware. And he was so distraught. When I heard this story, I said, I have to bring this. I have to write it. It's like 3 a.m, and I called my agent. I was represented by William Morris at the time. And remember, I'm on a deadline. I'm in the middle of another movie for CBS that I'm writing. And I call my agent. I tell him the story. And he said, holy expletive. He said, CBS. And first thing in the morning, he called the producers for whom I was writing the movie. And he told them the story, and he said, oh my God. So they called CBS before the day was over. I had a deal, and I was Consul General of Lebanon to go to Lebanon. And this was in the middle of the war. I mean, not only was nobody going, no planes were flying. You couldn't get a visa. I mean, everybody was hysterical. How's she going to do it? I don't know how. I swear, I went into the Consul General's office. I told him I had to do this. He said, you're out of your mind. And he gave me whatever I needed. Yeah, I was on a plane. I had no idea what I was doing. There was a war going on. The only airline flying in, surprise, surprise, was Air France.
Which year was this?
It was First Lebanon War.
Wow, 82.
82.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. I have asthma in my voice. I'm sorry, folks.
We're loving listening to you. So.
Thank you. It was the First Lebanon War, and I went in. I'm flying on this plane, and there are 12 people on the plane. And because nobody was getting in, and all of a sudden, and we're heading over Beirut, and I'm thinking, well, this isn't bad. All of a sudden, we've got helicopter escort, and I hear behind me and the guns in the helicopter, something was shooting.
Wow.
we land, everybody gets off the plane. They're fine. I get off the plane. And
In Beirut.
yeah, well, wherever the airport was, I don't remember, but yeah, Beirut. This woman comes to me and she's got a dossier on me. Now, I'm in my late 20s. How big, how much of a dossier could this woman have? This big. And they took me into a little room at the airport. Now, mind you, CBS, I was not part of the news department. I was drama and TV movies, long form. I was the entertainment division. And so there was no provision made. I had no car. I had no driver. I talked to a correspondent friend of mine who said, well, the only place you have to stay, the safest, is where the foreign correspondents are staying. And that's the Commodore Hotel in Beirut. So when I finished with this woman, they actually took me, whoever this, I never found out who it was, probably military secret police. They took me to the hotel, dropped me off, and that was it. I walked in, I check in, and I get inside, and I'm looking around, and outside bombs are going off. The cafe for the hotel has plastic covering that was like it was bulletproof, but not rocket proof. And so people were eating, correspondents were eating on the street. I knew no one. I check in and I look around and I see IDF, Baruch Hashem. Is that part of Lebanon? And so I'll never forget, his name was Major Barry Sawersky of the IDF stationed in Beirut. They had a camp above the city and that was their turf. And Barry walked, and he was, by the way, the director of the Tel Aviv Ballet. Walked up to me and he said, okay, he said, you're Jewish. I said, he could tell. And I said, yeah. He said, what is a nice Jewish girl like you doing in a
war zone in Beirut?
like this? And I told him that I was writing a movie for CBS and I really wanted the Israeli perspective. And it turns out he knew my cousin. It was, well, there was a reporter. Oh, so I was listening. I had no idea where I was going, by the way. All I knew was that I wanted this story and I had to get PLO perspective. I had to. So I went up to one of the correspondents. I said, where's the PLO? And he said, Arafat's compound is up in Tripoli. Nobody goes there. So I said, okay. So I called for a cab the next day to take me up to Tripoli. And it so happens, I called from the lobby, the CBS French correspondent was there listening, and he went berserk. He said, they didn't get you a car? And I said, no, I didn't. No, I had to have one. He said, they didn't get you anything? He went crazy. So he got me a car on the CBS News budget. So I remember faxing, because there were no cell phones. I faxed my agent and I said, going up to Tripoli to meet with Arafat.
It's called Jewish chutzpah.
Yeah, stupid. I had no idea. So I get this fax back, and he said, "What?" And I didn't even answer. So the car came, and no one told me that you leave your key in the mailbox when you leave, so that the Israeli army can track you. This is for all the correspondents. So that if your key is still there and a certain amount of time has passed, they look for you. Nobody told me that, so I took my keys. Everybody thought I was.
So no one would know that you were gone.
No. So the driver, I told him where I wanted to go, and he started screaming. He said, "Are you quick?" He said, "I'm not driving there." I said, "Please, I need to get up there." They didn't know I was coming. So we took this road up to Tripoli. Now, there are snipers, there's fighting, there are bombs going off on the side. People are shooting on the side of the road, and I see a store that was actually open selling brass and copper. And I said, "Oh, I have to get something. I'm going to souvenir."
Oh my word.
We walk in, so the driver's like cursing at me. I knew he was cursing at me. He stopped though, and I got some beautiful stuff. But then I looked in the back, and I thought, now why would they be open? And I started what my instinct was telling me. Obviously, this was more than just a shop open in the middle of nowhere. They were making munitions for the PLO.
What do you mean?
That wasn't just a brass and copper shop in the back.
Wow.
They were making ammunition. And I kind of figured, I mean, that's really why I stopped. But but I didn't want anybody to know. So I said, okay, this is what's going on. So we got up to Tripoli, and there were two blonde, blue-eyed journalists leaving who were PLO sympathizers. And they said,
European?
Yeah, I think actually they were either Danish or German, if I remember. And they said, "Oh, you'll love them. They're so wonderful." And I went, the driver dropped me off, and he said, "Okay, I'll see you in a week." I said, "What?" I was up there for a week. I went in, and he said, "Who are you?" And I didn't even have a press credential. I said, "Well, I'm a writer. I'm writing a movie for CBS." And I knew instinctively, obviously, what to say. "I'm a sympathizer. I want to tell your story." Well, the minute they heard that, I mean, this was before the PLO machine, the Hamas machine, the PR. This was the beginning of it. I witnessed the starting of this. All I had to do was say, "I want to tell your story." I was golden. But flashed my Writer's Guild card. Like that's going to get me. It barely gets us into screenings, but I said.
They were hungry for press.
Yes. And I said, "Now remember, this is a movie, not a documentary." So they took me in. There were three. And there was a small cabin before you got into the compound. In this cabin, they sat me down in a chair, and they had, who knows, they were maybe AK-47s. And
These were men, no women.
No, not yet. No, I hadn't seen the women yet. There were women and children. Right. I hadn't seen them yet. And there were three men, and they were young. And the one man had his, whatever it was, AK-47 on me. Another one had a pistol pointed at my head. All I'm thinking is, oh my God, what am I going to tell my mother? But I'm really thinking, okay, I was praying. I just said, "God, just get me through this." And they were asking.
Adrenaline junkies.
Yeah, seriously. Times 10. And one guy who had the gun at my head, he never moved. The guy with the AK-47, they were commandos. The commando with the AK-47 was circling me while I was sitting in this chair. And they were they meant business. If they had figured out I was Jewish, and I wouldn't be talking to you now. And so they looked at me, and they stared at my face, they stared at my nose, and they said, "What's your background?" And I lied, I said French. And they said, I told them my family going back. And because I knew that would sit well with them, because they were very close to the French.
Right, sure.
And so they asked me what my father's name was. And I told them I was making things up. And I said, well, it was something or other. And we shortened it because nobody could pronounce it. After an hour and a half of this, finally, they let me go to the back of the compound. They took me. I didn't go right away to Arafat. They took me into the residences, which were little cabins, just like that, barely. They were huts. And there were families living in there. And the women were in training. So I was watching the women's army training. And in the very far end was the children's camp.
Wow.
Children were being trained. And they would take them from the age of 4 till they hit, I think, 12 or 13.
It was a physical military training, or there was also indoctrination?
Both. This was the beginning of the schools. And everything we are seeing now, it started there. And I witnessed this. I sat there.
Did the women embrace you energetically? Was there a certain kind of camaraderie, energy?
There was a distance. What's interesting is there was a distance. The men were actually better than the women. The women didn't trust me.
Right.
They didn't like me. Plus I was blonde, and that bothered them.
Well, Kabbalistically, people tend to think of women as being more associated with chesed, loving kindness, and men with gevurah, severity, and that's just because of physical strength, but we're actually the opposite on the inside. The woman may be softer and on the outside in terms of physical prowess, but they are more characterized by gevurah, by severity, and I think
they personified it. I got to tell you, Shimona, they personified the entire spectrum of the gevurah.
Wow.
Because even with their children, I didn't feel a sense of softness.
Really?
Yeah. There was love. There was no question. But they were on a mission. And it was all about Israel. I mean, it really was. When I asked Arafat what he wanted, he looked at me and said, all of Israel. I mean, there was not this. I have this on tape. I have taped interview with him. Abbas was there, and Hanan Ashrawi I met.
Ashrawi.
I met her there. I didn't spend time with her, but I met her. And they were very clear. But what was more clear to me was, and it was frightening, not because it was, not even because of what they were doing, but because I knew what they wanted to do. And I knew how much if you could have seen the hatred, the anger in their eyes. I have never experienced anything like that. Now, the older people, the old men, the religious Muslims, the men were fantastic. They knew a different time. They knew a different way, and they hated what was going on.
Really?
I think so.
Those men in their compound or men who were outside of the camp?
Both. I met in the refugee camp when I went onto the Israeli side. I mean, once I got back into Israel and I could breathe again, you're very aware, obviously, in these situations, you don't let your guard down for 1 minute. I barely breathed the whole week I was up there. I felt that kind of, I could die at any moment, and I've never felt that. And it didn't frighten me. I was just aware that I had to be on guard.
you're speaking here about the older generation and what they remembered, and of course that makes me think a little bit ahead to what we want to close with, which is a discussion about your new script that you're working on. But just before we get to that, did you ever get to meet Ariana Falachi?
I have not.
Italian journalist, no. I found her writings to be very interesting. I mean, she was really it seems like not a devotee, but she was extremely close to Arafat. And you see in her writings what she wrote about him, and then what she wrote about him a decade or so later, after she understood that hatred and that the real intention was to obliterate Israel.
Yes. Well, he said it. He didn't make any bones about it.
Have you ever published those interviews, the audio?
No. Part of the reason, and I thought about it. I've certainly been approached, or not now, but I was. Part of the reason was because I did not go in as a journalist. And as a writer, a dramatic writer, and I give my word that in every interview that I will never, this is between us. And so I feel I would be a violation.
Out of integrity.
Yeah, no matter who it is.
Wow.
I won't violate that.
That is just to quote Olivia, who is now on the call with us.
Hi.
I spoke about you earlier, Livy, before you got on.
Yeah.
But one of her favorite expressions is that is heart opening. And I must say that is really heart opening, Stephanie, that there could be people that you are so out of alignment with and who wanted you dead. And yet if you've given your word as a writer, you were going to keep that.
Absolutely. I had to. If I had not, honestly, I don't think I would have been comfortable ever writing another word. I would have, but I would have felt like a lie.
Wow.
I can't do that. I mean, I've talked to all kinds of people, and I won't violate that. But the one thing that I did when I was in the refugee camp with the Israeli commanders, Major General, because Major Swersky set me up with them. They took me into a refugee camp, and it was 1 and 2 in the morning. And the old men were sitting there drinking coffee, and we stayed till dawn talking. And I just shut up and listened. It was extraordinary. And I taped some of it with their permission. And the kids started coming out when the sun went up. And I was playing with them, and they were laughing, and I was the tickle monster. And one of the old men called me over, and he was tears in his eyes, and he gave me his prayer beads. And I said, I can't take these. He said, you must. He said, you made the children laugh.
Wow.
They don't laugh anymore. They don't know how to laugh. Well, I mean, I'm sobbing, and, of course I took the beads. And the little boy, there was one little boy who was very attached to me. And when we got in the car to leave, and I got a shot of this, I got a picture of it, but that sweet, angelic, smiling face all of a sudden went into a rage, darkened. It went into a rage.
Child's face.
Child. He couldn't have been more than 7. He took a grenade out of his pocket. I had been playing with this kid, and the pin was in it. He threw it. He hadn't taken the pin out. He threw it and thank Baruch Hashem, nothing happened. They ran. But that same child.
Wow.
Can you imagine what must have been going on?
When the Lubavitcher Rebbe began the organization for Jewish children, I think it was the first talk he ever spoke to them. He told them that they had 2 aspects in themselves, and that one was like Yocheved, the daughter of Levi, Jacob's granddaughter, and how even as an infant, days old, she was counted as one of the 70 with her Zayda, who was this sagacious person. And the Rebbe tells the children, you should know that you have that Yocheved inside of you. If you're looking at it in a kind of intrapsychic Jungian way, the Torah reads it. I think Jung was probably influenced by that understanding of how the sages looked at our various dimensions and aspects. And the Rebbe says to the children, you have this part in you. And then he says, and also know that you have within you the selfish, animalistic part. It's like the divine self and the animal self. And I guess our life is so much about learning how to modulate and balance those parts. But you brought up the elders, which of course brings, I see there's some chats, some questions that people have. And for those who are on our live webinar chat, I just wanted to hear it, tell those of you who are here, you can submit through the Q&A for questions, and I'll open up the chat in a minute. Levi is here, and my son, and he'll pass on anything that's coming on from Facebook. So you can write to us and we'll take questions. So we had set this to 45 minutes to an hour, but before we take those questions, it's okay if we go over, we have permission.
Thank you.
I just, I used to, I'll share this with you.
Please.
I once read research about a scientist he was a scientist who was doing genetic research on different tribes around the world. Happened to be Jewish, I think, and then he did research on priests, on Kohanim, and he found that Jewish priests have the closest genetic code of any tribe. And what he showed in his research is how few generations there are between us and Aaron the high priest, let's say, right? So let's say you take 4 generations in a century, it's probably 5, because even though now people are getting married later, let's say there were 5 generations in a century, in 100 years, so there were 50 and 1,000, which gives you 150 generations in 3,000 years. And then another 300 years, so that's another 15, like 165. There's very few women or men in a direct line between us and their parents. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was, I think, 175th from King David. And King David was the 15th from Abraham. So this comes to my mind when we are speaking about your new project, your new work, and these elders that were in the camps who had a memory. It's like, well, if I can connect with my grandchildren or great-grandchildren, and I remember my great-grandmother, I could hold, one person could hold many, many people. And actually, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe did that. It wasn't through him, it was through his grandmother, Rebbetzin Rivka, who remembered stories from her grandfather, and he was the son of the Alter Rebbe. I mean, she held from the first Rebbe to the Frierdiker Rebbe, was connected by one person. So I feel that this idea of ancestors is so vital to continuing understanding that connection backwards. And your new work is My Ancestors Dreamed Me Here.
Yes, it is.
Want to tell us a little bit about
that? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this, Shimona. I never talk about this stuff, ever.
Really? You should. People need to hear it. It's just wonderful to hear what you hear.
But there was, the crisis because of COVID in the Native American community. And someone reached out.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, they're suffering terribly. COVID has hit them hard. There are no supplies. There's no money. The government has not kicked in money yet. They're holding. And by the time they're going by size of tribe, by the time it trickles down. And so I have been working. I was asked to get supplies, whatever. I can't do that. I mean, I can, but I'm not really.
Not the best use of you.
No, it's not. And that's what I said, why don't I do what I do best? And I had been talking to Protect Native Elders, which is a wonderful organization, started by a woman who's become one of my soul sisters. You would love her, Jo Overton, and her partner in this, Tyrone Whitehorse, who creates gorgeous jewelry. Oh my goodness. And Jo is Lakota Sioux. I said, I don't want to, I'm going to be a waste of time organizing people. That's not what I do. Let me do what I do best. Let me write a play. Let me hear the stories of the Native elders. And ancestor is so important. And in talking to Jo and in interviewing over the phone or Zoom so many people, so many Native Americans, what I have discovered is, and we just get chills constantly, some of the prayers are the same as ours. No idea, but we honor the four directions at Sukkot. We pray for dew, we pray for rain, the way we tend to animals, it's the same.
Let me ask you a question, Stephanie. Is this reminiscent for you of Sister Africa at all, where you spoke about the Jewish woman and the Congolese woman?
No.
Does it remind you of that process at all? Completely
no, because it was so different. I first of all, I went into the Congo. I went to watch, and I spent time in the rape wards, and I spent time with the people. We went into the prison. I met the rape. I mean, it's a different consciousness. And the only similarity at all, the only thread was in the fact that they had been tortured. And we come from that. Jews. This is a closeness, a spiritual closeness that I cannot even begin to explain. And one of the elders, Harlan Eaglebear, who has become my friend, he's Lakota Sioux. Harlan is teaching himself Hebrew. Harlan believes that either they're a lost tribe of Israel or we're one of their lost tribes. He calls us the First Nations.
Wow. So what's the theme of your story? Can you tell us?
What it is now, when I flesh it out, for now, it's going to be Zoom readings, and it's going to be as a fundraiser for Protect Native Elders, and I'll do monologues now, and Rebbe Soul Bruce and a wonderful Native American flautist, Blue Fluteman, is doing the music, and we'll do it between the monologues. But for the play, I'm fleshing it out into 3 generations, different tribes. And I want to go back because I've been studying the treaties. What I have learned has just turned my stomach in how we've treated Native Americans. And we as Jews, of all people, we have thrown them off their land. We know what that feels like. We've been expelled everywhere.
And I say that for me, being in America, I always felt a certain alignment with ethnicity. I think that Jews, as much as we have lived in cities, there's still so much of our history and our practice is connected to the land, and I think that
absolutely.
I would find myself at weddings, wanting to dance with the waitresses, because they kind of had that vibe, and but I mean, I don't mean to say that in any way that is diminishing, but just a sense of celebrating and resonance, the attunement of one culture to another. I want to just ask you a question, if you don't mind. Someone,
of course,
one message, and anyone else is welcome to submit questions if you would like. But someone says there was a rumor that Arafat was a pedophile, and that is why he started those camps for young boys. Did you see that at all, or hear anything when you were there?
No. I first of all, if I had, I wouldn't say. Second of all, out of that same, but no, I never did. No, this was purely militia, purely military, pure purpose destroying Israel and Jews and getting their story out. That's all they want. That was the beginning of this machine that you see now.
Right.
The boys, if they grew up, God willing, now they're probably Hamas. Who knows?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I was also thinking that as you were speaking, which was, what has become? Where's that young boy who you were torture and who was so close, and then when you left through the grenade? Yeah. Someone else submitted a question. She says, I missed the name of the teleplay for CBS. What is it? Thanks.
Which one?
Right. I don't know which one. Is she on? Yeah, you are. Let me see if I can just message her privately. Hold on 1 second in the chat.
Remember, they never got made, some of these, so you wouldn't know.
Possibly, but to the person who said what was the name of the CBS, here we go, coming up, Lebanon Story.
That name, I actually wrote that as a play. And the name of the movie was The Vow. I called it The Vow for a while, but then there was another movie, The Vow. So that became Faces of War. And that was
a movie, but wasn't there a play, Jihad, or was that?
Jihad is different. Yeah, Jihad is different. Jihad is about the Hamas mother and the Israeli mother. And the Hamas mother has a 16-year-old daughter who's a suicide bomber. The Israeli mother has a 16-year-old daughter who's killed in the bombing. And it's how these lives intersect. But for that, I went into the women's groups. There was.
I want to speak about that for a sec. I just want to tell this woman was that, yeah, so she got it clear. I think that the movie that you were talking about, so that was the movie and it's separate from Jihad.
Jihad's totally different.
Yeah, yeah. Can you just say one thing about that before we close? Let's maybe make that.
I'm sorry.
Huh?
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much here.
Oh my gosh, we're loving it. I'm loving it. And anyone who doesn't, they're welcome to go have their dinner anytime.
Jihad is about, I went into, I was in the Intifada as much as anyone can be in it. I've been in Gaza and I've spoken with women whose children are suicide bombers. I've interviewed them, I've sat with them, I've been in a couple of homes, and it's been really a treacherous, torturous, agonizing experience because it's not the emotions you would expect to feel or see. And I don't know if it was because I was an outsider, I don't know. But in interviewing them, then I went obviously back into Israel.
You're saying that you didn't, what did you not expect to see? That they were not remorseful or that they were celebrating?
That's right. They were not. They were proud. There was one woman who had, I want to get this accurately. She had 4 children and 3 of them were suicide bombers. And she wanted her 4th child to be a martyr. Now, I cannot imagine this. It is so far out of my comprehension. I can't. And then you go into Israel and you see the strength and the passion and compassion and the love. And I said, I have to write this because I can't not. And so
I have to put in one idea, a mystical idea, if you don't mind, at the end.
Please, I love it.
Abraham is the embodiment of loving kindness, of chesed. he had two children. One was Yitzchak, who is the second attribute in the tree of life, emotional attribute, which is Gedura, restraint or awe, respect. But his other child, Ishmael, was also chesed, loving kindness, but loving kindness that was unholy. And then Yitzchak had two children. His one son, Jacob, is the next emotional attribute, which is Tiferet, harmony or compassion, balance. And his other son, Esau, is his attribute of severity, but in an unholy way. And my understanding is that the tradition of Yishmael is giving, loving, being passionate to the point of death. That is what allows for Jihad, is the root that hasn't yet been rectified, and that there can be a celebration of death. Yes, there are points, there are moments where a person has to give their lives for a greater cause, but that's very different from enacting death. It's defensive as opposed to offensive. Anyway, I just want to say there is a message here from Olivia. Thank you, Stephanie and Shimona. Can we do this again? Thanks, Olivia. Anyway, everyone, it was great to hang out with you.
I loved this.
Yeah, me too. I just, the stories and the creativity.
Well, I love the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic element. It just, I want more, talking about this, it just gives me so much to be
Thank you. Let's do it again. Let's do it again.
Oh, I'd love to.
The project sounds wonderful. My ancestors dreamed me here, and you'll keep us posted so that we can follow along as they dream you into greater and greater manifestation.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you.
And thanks to my son Levick for helping us make this happen.
Thank you,
Nachum, Falachi, and everyone else too.
Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.
Thanks. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Talk soon.
Amen.